talking about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and especially in regard to the ongoing hostilities and the war in Caucasus, the reportings and the analysis of the situation and the probable solution to the conflict, many people, of course, talk about the historical roots of the conflict and who has the historic rights to the region, etc. And as important as they might be, in order to explain quite a lot of the background information, which also explains the current situation, but also how different actors, not only Armenia and Azerbaijan, but also external actors such as Turkey, Russia, and even Iran are invested in this conflict. The historical background is significant. But I would actually assert that in order to solve the current conflict, you only need to go back to February 20th, 1988. And we don't talk about the fact that the Nagorno-Karabakh region, as one of the similar regions created during the Stalinist era in early 1920s, was created in order to have a kind of fifth column enclaves or pockets of minorities put in other newly built Soviet republics in order to keep the republic leadership on a tight leash. I want to skip that historical part and just jump to February 20, 1988, on the date that after the initiation of the popular movement in Nagorno-Karabakh, the local parliament, the Soviet of Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast province, decided with the votes 110 against 17 to request the transfer of the region from Azerbaijan Soviet Republic to Armenian Soviet Republic. That request was, of course, denied by the central authorities in Moscow, because if they would have granted that request, it would have set a very dangerous precedence for many similar enclaves throughout the entire Soviet Union. But what is significant here is that what came afterward was a military reply to this popular movement and a democratic expression of the people in Nagorno-Karabakh. Baku tried by force to subjugate the people of Nagorno-Karabakh and their decision to separate from Azerbaijan. That led to an armed conflict, which then went to be a full-fledged war, ending up with the Armenian control of not only Nagorno-Karabakh, but also the surrounding 5 provinces as a buffered zone to secure, to act as a security for Nagorno-Karabakh. And it is within this context that I think one should talk about whether, when talking about that Armenia is occupying Azerbaijani territory in violation of international law. Because when you're saying that, although it's partly actually true, but it's definitely taken out of context, especially when you look at international law and the principles that we talk about, which are also the ground on which the latest proposed solution for peace, the so-called Madrid Principles from 2007, are based upon. The Madrid Principles are suggested by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, and the Minsk group, which is meddling in the conflict. But before talking about the Madrid Principles and why that is, in my opinion, too, the only viable solution to the conflict, one needs to look at the international law and the principles which are at play here, namely the two main principles of territorial integrity versus the people's right for self-determination. And there is actually seemingly misunderstanding or miscomprehension of these being mutually exclusive, which they are not. But there is also an idea that one, namely the territorial integrity, surpasses the other one, people's right for self-determination, which is not true. And for that, you have to go to the Helsinki Final Act, which these are mentioned in, and which is the basis for OSCE as an organization. And the Helsinki Final Act is a collection of 10 basic principles. And the important fact to point out is that these 10 principles are mutually equal. There is no principle which surpasses another one in significance or value. And the main theme in the Helsinki Final Act is to be able to solve any disputes or any conflicts in a peaceful manner without the use of force. Having that said, we can go to the fourth principle, which is the territorial integrity, which, among others, mentions that states should refrain from any action which could lead to military occupation, which is in contravention to international law. Now, that mentioning is quite significant and interesting in the context of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, because it opens up the possibility for any humanitarian military intervention without breaking the international law. But in order to activate that closure and that possibility, you need other steps in place. Foremost would be the sanctioning by the Security Council of UN. But leaving that apart, we could say that if you look at that principle alone, you would be justified to say that Armenia is occupying Azerbaijan territory in violation of international law. However, if saying that, you're disregarding the other principle, number 8 in the Helsinki Final Act, people's right for self-determination, which mentions, among others, more or less verbatim, that all people have the right in full freedom as any time they choose to decide their internal or external political status without external intervention. On paper, these two principles would mean that you could actually solve a dispute based on these two principles in a peaceful manner, where the people have the last word to say about their external political status in this case. But in reality, it is more or less almost always it is the state who possesses the political and the military might to overrun in defending its territorial integrity, overrunning the right of the people for speaking up their will and self-determination. With other words, this means that it is sheer political and military power which decides the outcome of territorial integrity winning over people's right for self-determination, not international law. And now going back to the Madrid Principles, they are actually from 2007. They were the fourth proposal by the OSCE Minsk group, when the third previous attempts to solution were rejected by several or one side of the conflict. And the Madrid Principles are meant to be a compromise based on these very two principles: territorial integrity of Azerbaijan while giving the Nagorno-Karabakh population the right for self-determination. And the Madrid Principles are have six basic items. Number one is about Armenian forces evacuating the surrounding regions outside Nagorno-Karabakh and giving back the area to Azerbaijani control. The area will be demilitarized, but be handed over to Azerbaijani control nonetheless. Number two is having an interim status for Nagorno-Karabakh, guaranteeing their security and some sort of self-rule, but still within the territorial integrity or territorial borders of Azerbaijan for the time being. Number three is about securing a land corridor connecting Armenia with Nagorno-Karabakh, the Lachin-Kelbajar corridor. And number four is about deciding the final status of Nagorno-Karabakh in an internationally binding expression of will, that is a referendum. Number five is about allowing all internal refugees to return to their homes wherever that might be. And finally, number six about international guarantees for security, including a peacekeeping force. When the Madrid Principles came in 2007, all parties actually accepted the terms, which meant that for a short while everybody was quite rejoiced over the fact that we might have finally have a solution for the conflict. But the proposal has not been able to be implemented, mainly because that Azerbaijan refused to accept to set a date for that envisioned referendum, instead insisting that Armenian forces should evacuate the adjacent areas and they should implement the other parts of the proposal, and someday in the future we will deal with this referendum. Now, from the Armenian perspective, this was a quite dangerous proposal because it would mean that they would give up the surrounding areas, giving up the security buffer zone that they have, while the issue of the status would be pushed into an indefinite future, a so-called Cypernification of the conflict. So the Armenian side instead insisted that we should set a date for this referendum, whether it would be in 6 months, in a year, or 2 years, but we should have a date set for this referendum and it would be binding. But as the negotiation and this peace deal has not been implemented, and the frustration has been building up, and the regime in Baku has become more and more authoritarian, it has also resulted in the fact that Baku has started to push even further away from these principles, insisting that the envisioned referendum should be about the status of Nagorno-Karabakh within the borders of Azerbaijan, which is, of course, then totally unacceptable for the Armenian side, which would mean that we are back to square one where the whole conflict started. But unfortunately, this maximalist approach from Azerbaijan has also given more fuel to more hardline voices within the Armenian camp, demanding that we are going to keep the territories outside Nagorno-Karabakh, that we are not going to give back what we have gained in war. And by the way, these are historical Karabakh territory. So unfortunately, this hardline maximalist approach from both sides has driven the party far away from the existing proposal. But nonetheless, this is actually the existing principles proposal on the table still today. So when the parties choose to go back to the negotiation table, hopefully sooner than later, instead of trying to solve this on the battleground, killing each other, the Madrid Principles are still the proposal on the table that the two parties are going to negotiate about. In reality, it means that at the moment, it is the international community that is choosing whether to, again, from a realpolitik perspective, allow the voice of power and military might run over the international law regarding people's right for self-determination or not. And by forcing the both parties, but mostly Azerbaijan, who is trying to, is openly saying that they are going to solve the issue once and for all by military means, to end the violence and go to the negotiation table and solve it based on international law? Or are we going to push for the military might running over the international law?